The Muromachi period marked a huge change in Japan as the Ashikaga clan took control of the shogunate and moved the headquarters back to Kyoto to the Muromachi district of the city. With the return of the government to the capital, the popularizing trends of the Kamakura period came to an end, and cultural expression took on a more aristocratic, elitist character. In this video, we'll be covering the major events and the art of Japan's Muromachi period. The introduction of Zen Buddhism had a major impact on Japanese intellectual thought and aesthetic. Temple complexes developed for public ceremonies and to accommodate religious persons, and Zen gardens shift away from the typical Heian-era Shinden-style gardens to smaller, modest gardens to promote meditation. Zen's roots in China also restarted interest in contemporary Chinese thoughts and arts, expanding the range of subjects and styles seen in Japanese painting. The style gradually evolves from its Chinese roots to a more Japanese style. We start to see more individual painters with distinct styles. Finally, we'll talk about the Ashikaga patronage. The Ashikaga were great patrons of the arts, and they used it to establish their influence as a national ruler and to strip the imperial court of their traditional roles as cultural influencers. In particular, they favored the Kano school of painters. First, let's talk about how the Ashikaga clan came into power. By the end of the 13th century, the Kamakura Bakufu had lost control of its alliances with other samurai clans, and by 1319, they allowed an able emperor to take the throne. Emperor Go-Daigo made a series of attempts to overthrow the Bakufu. The first two attempts were unsuccessful, and he was deposed and exiled to the island of Oki. Third time's the charm, right? In 1333, he managed to escape and allied with a Kamakura general named Ashikaga Takeuji. Together, they crushed the already weakened Kamakura regime. Go-Daigo returned to Kyoto, having crushed the Bakufu forever, and started his new golden age of imperial rule. Yeah, right? No. Unfortunately for him, this period, called the Kenmu Restoration, was short-lived. Not long after, in 1335, Ashikaga Takeuji, the general who helped Go-Daigo crush the Kamakura Bakufu, was feeling like he was poorly recompensated by the emperor. He led a revolt, chased out Go-Daigo from the capital, and placed the 14-year-old Ko-myo on the throne. In 1338, Ashikaga assumed the title of shogun. Go-Daigo fled to the southern mountains of Yoshino, taking with him the imperial regalia. With the support of other clans opposed to Ashikaga, he set up a southern court in opposition to the northern court of the Ashikaga puppet in Kyoto. This period is called the Nambokucho period, during which civil war between the two courts lasted nearly 60 years. Ultimately, in 1392, the Ashikaga shogun Yoshimitsu persuaded the Emperor Go-Kameyama of the Southern Court to relinquish his claim and to turn over the imperial regalia to Go-Komatsu, the emperor in Kyoto. Yoshimitsu promised that the position would alternate between the northern and southern lines, but of course, he didn't keep his promise. You saw that coming, right? Yoshimitsu moved the seat of government to the Muromachi district of Kyoto, so this period following the reunification of the imperial lines is therefore known as the Muromachi period. A new subject in genre painting called Rakuchu Rakugai, meaning scenes in and around the capital, gives us a glimpse into life during this period of time. The subject matter is attributed to Tosa Mitsunobu, a foremost painter of the imperial court. The Tosa school, founded at the end of the 12th century, became a leading school of Yamato-e painting at the imperial court until the Meiji Restoration of 1868. One of the earliest surviving screens is known as the Reki Hakuset. The images typically depict a large panorama of the imperial capital seen from a bird's eye view and framed by gold dust clouds. They are usually a set of two folding screens made up of 6 panels each, called byobu. The clouds break up particular points to reveal the streets and buildings of the city. On these screens, 3 areas in particular are given prominence: the Gion Festival procession as it passes through the merchant district, the mansions of the court aristocrats, and the headquarters of the Bakufu and the mansions of the powerful daimyo in the Muromachi district. This reflects the three classes present in Kyoto at the time: the townsmen, the court aristocracy, and the samurai. These scenes offered an idealized view of the city through its different seasons. The viewing begins from the right on the right screen, with summer progressing over 6 panels towards the fall at the Imperial Palace. The left screen takes the viewer through winter and into spring. Accordingly, they depict the various festivals that take place over the course of the year. They project a peaceful, joyful, and even prosperous image of the city, in striking contrast of reality, a city war-torn and half-destroyed. Zen Buddhism, imported from China's Chen sect, was established in Japan at the end of the 12th century, but it didn't flourish as an independent sect within the worldly Heian period. However, in the more somber times of war, this sect's emphasis on the stern self-discipline and need to perceive the true nature of things made it more receptive to the period scholars and elites. Zen would continue to have a strong influence on Japanese intellectual thought and behavior. The main goal of Zen Buddhism was to attain enlightenment through intense meditation. The sect is less interested in the worldly affairs and lived with humble means in comparative poverty. The seriousness of the sect attracted the intelligentsia and found an audience among the cultural and military elite. There are 2 main practices to attain deep awareness of truth. The first is zazen, which is meditation while sitting straight-backed with legs crossed. One must be completely present in the here and now with objectiveless thoughts. The second is koan, which are questions or exchanges with a master that cannot be understood or answered with rational thought. One must break through rational patterns of thought to the clarity of intuitive enlightenment. Wabi is an aesthetic associated with Zen. It values pleasures taken in austerity and solitude, beauty perceived in simplicity, and an appreciation of objects weathered by time. The concept of wabi initially referred to the quality of life led by an ascetic, but over time it developed into an aesthetic ideal to be sought after in one's daily life. The element of sabi, often paired with wabi, adds the notion of detachment and tranquility, such as what one achieves at the end of life. These 2 aesthetic concepts become fundamental to the performance of the tea ceremony, which developed in the 15th century out of the Zen practice of drinking strong tea in order to stay awake while meditating. And together they make wabi-sabi, which is really fun to say, and I don't think it has anything to do with wasabi, not that I know of anyways. The composition of the Buddhist temple changed under Zen. A central complex was developed for public ceremonies, and alongside it a series of private sub-temples, or tachu, built to accommodate religious leaders, often retired abbots, and their monastic and lay adherents. Tofukuji, one of the first Zen temples to be built in Kyoto, preserves the appearance of an early Zen monastic complex. Founded in 1236 and completed in 1255, it was severely damaged by fires in 1319 and 1334, but was quickly rebuilt with the support of Bakufu leaders. Tofukuji has the earliest extant example of a new type of gate called the sanmon, or mountain gate. Built over a period of 40 years, the gate is a 2-storied structure with 3 entrance doors and a functional second story, which is accessed by a covered stairway. While the exterior preserves the more restrained and somber aesthetic of the Chinese Southern Song period building, the interior of the second floor turns to the bright ornamentation typical of Chinese decoration in the 14th and 15th centuries, with designs painted in green, red, brown, black, and gold. Enshrined in the single room are sculptures typical of sanmon images. Shaka and the 16 Rakan, great practitioners who had achieved enlightenment, were particularly revered in Zen. Of course, we have to talk about Zen gardens. These landscape gardens were created as an aid to meditation. By the Middle Heian period, gardens were incorporated into temple compounds, which were laid out in imitation of the residencies of the nobility. However, the gardens associated with Zen sub-temples are very different. They were constructed in a limited amount of space, and this very limitation is used as an asset in their design, which is kept extremely simple. Furthermore, as aids to Zen practice, the objects they contain seem to invite metaphysical interpretation. Most of them are constructed largely from small pebbles and rocks, with live plantings limited to moss and simple shrubbery, and are called kare sansui, or dry landscapes, although some Zen gardens also incorporate water features as ponds. Ryoanji is the most famous kare sansui and has become the epitome of Zen tranquility and reflection. The temple was founded on the western outskirts of Kyoto in 1450. Like much of the rest of Kyoto, it didn't survive the war intact, but by 1488 it had been rebuilt. The temple was burned down again in the late 18th century, and the present garden dates to around that time. Made entirely of rocks set amidst raked pebbles, one interpretation of its imagery is that it is a seascape. Another interpretation has been a tigress leading her cubs across a river. Whatever the image evoked, the spare, simple beauty of the design has seldom been equaled. Zen Buddhism's focus on universal truth expressed in the present moment vastly widened the range of themes painted by monks and for temples. This includes paintings of famous Zen eccentrics and evocative landscapes. Artists connected to particular temples developed considerable skill at working in very different styles and using different kinds of materials. Monk painter Kichizan Mincho was a versatile artist who was appointed to Tofukuji. This large painting depicts the death of the Shaka Buddha, to be displayed each February on the anniversary of his death. Executed in 1408, the picture is conservative in style and treatment, but also displays a somewhat free style of brushwork. The outlines are of varying widths, and some shading is used to model the old and emaciated faces of Buddhist disciples. While it's not totally monochromatic, it primarily uses red as an accent against the different flesh tones in black. There are two types of Zen paintings, exemplified here by two of Mincho's paintings. The Doshakuga, illustrated by this 1421 painting of Karin in a white robe, and the Shigajiku, illustrated by this 1413 landscape. The Doshakuga is a tradition of imagery that depicts Buddhist themes. It is intended to convey the subjective experience of receiving spiritual insights or revelations. Subjects include bodhisattvas, great Zen masters, and eccentrics. Overall, they move away from mysticism and towards pragmatism and realism, values that Zen Buddhism easily fit with. The Karin sits in an informal pose in a grotto, her traditional abode, and gazes out over the ocean. The bodhisattva is treated as a beautiful, languid, and feminine figure, clad in a simple white robe and bedecked with gold jewelry. Her divinity is suggested only by the crown and halo created from a perfect circle of mist through which part of the rock can be seen. In addition, this image is a marker of the feminization of Karin, which had begun earlier on the continent and which, with paintings such as this, is almost complete. The bodhisattva of compassion will from this point onward usually be depicted as a beautiful but matronly figure. Shigajiku is a type of landscape painting which combines a monochrome image of an imaginary landscape with poetry in a hanging scroll. This practice can be traced back to Chinese precedents. China's educated elite had long expressed themselves through poetry and calligraphy, but during the Tang Dynasty they had also begun to turn the calligraphic brush to painting landscapes as another way of expressing their feelings on a subject or to commemorate a particular event. The Song Dynasty was a great golden age of landscape painting by these scholar officials, to which the Tan school in China was culturally very close. Remember that Zen is derived from the Chan school. The Chinese monk painters also began to paint personal, calligraphically brushed monochrome landscapes as expressions of Zen thought and practice. Along with the import of religious learnings, trading missions also brought in many Chinese paintings and objects of art, which profoundly influenced Japanese artists working for Zen temples and the shogunate. Not only was subject matter influenced, but also their use of color. While Yamato-e used strong, bright colors, the Zen paintings followed the Chinese style, where painting were generally monochrome with black and white or different tones of a single color. Mokuan was ordained as a priest in Kamakura and journeyed to China to perfect his knowledge of Zen. His hanging scroll, For Sleepers, depicts Kanzan and his friend Jitoku fast asleep with the monk Bukan and his tiger. Zen eccentrics Kanzan and Jitoku worked in the kitchen of a Chan temple in 7th century. These two embody the Zen concept of the untrammeled soul, and the monk Bukan raised Jitoku and was reputed to ride a tiger in the mountains. Medium gray, fairly broad strokes are used for the bodies, while fine strokes were used for the facial features and dark ink was used for details on the shoes, belt, and hair. Only the briefest details are supplied about the setting. A light wash suggests rocks besides the figures and the shoreline before them, while darker strokes are used for the vines, tree branches, and river rocks. While sparse, each stroke is intentionally chosen with particular darkness and size for particular elements. Let's talk about 3 important painter priests who were associated with the Zen temple Shokukuji: Josetsu, Tenshoo Shuubun, and Sesshu Toyo. Shuubun was Josetsu's student and Toyo was Shuubun's student. Josetsu's painting, Catching a Catfish with a Gourd, marks the turning point in Muromachi painting. Another example of a doshakuga, there are 31 inscriptions written at the top, each by a different poet, one of which refers to the painting as being in the new style. In the foreground, a man is on the bank of a stream, holding a small gourd and looking at a large, slithery catfish. Mist fills the middle ground, and the background mountains appear to be far in the distance. It is generally assumed that this new style of painting refers to a more Chinese sense of deep space within the picture plane. This painting is also a koan, or thought problem, used to aid in attaining enlightenment. It prompts the worshipper with a puzzle: how to catch a slippery catfish in a gourd. Tenshoo Shuubun's painting, Reading in the Bamboo Study, depicts a scholar's study almost hidden in the bamboo grove. At the top is a long introduction and 5 brief inscriptions, each by a different person. The building has a thatched roof and a large window through which the scholar can be seen holding something, perhaps a book. Close to the house, a sharp bluff is capped by 2 pine trees, one straight and the other bent. The gradation of the paint with short, repetitive strokes describes the natural elements with a somewhat decorative effect, but leaves a convincing impression of space. The work utilizes several common motifs from the Song dynasty, which in turn were common in Shigajiku paintings. This includes the scholar and his attendant crossing the bridge, the scholar visible through the window of his study, fishing boats close to land, and the temple buildings in the distance. Also, the dominant motif of crossed pine trees and the placement of most of the elements to one side are devices often used by the Southern Song painter Shagui, whose works were highly praised by Japanese collectors, including the Ashikaga shoguns. These landscapes were an imagined ideal Chinese landscape rather than what would have been seen around Kyoto. Perhaps the most well-known artist of this period was Sesshu Toyo. He later moved from Kyoto to Yamaguchi, where he met the Ouchi family. With the financial support of the Ouchi family, he was able to travel to China at the newly established capital of the Ming dynasty, Beijing. There, he studied contemporary Ming landscape paintings as well as earlier Southern Song and Yuan dynasty works. When he returned to Japan, he was a much sought-after artist throughout his later life. One of his most characteristic landscapes is a winter scene, perhaps part of a set of landscape hanging scrolls of the 4 seasons. In this painting are motifs from the Chinese Southern Song landscape painting to create an original and what is considered a typically Japanese statement. In the lower right, with the motif of 2 trees growing at the edge of the water, the viewer's eye is led back into the space by the diagonal lines of a stepped pathway along which a man with a wide-brimmed hat is climbing, presumably towards the temple complex visible above him. The hills through which he travels and the mountains in the background surround the temple buildings, making them seem like a warm oasis in a cold, icy wasteland. The foreground passages of rocks and trees are described with firm, dark brushstrokes, while the distant mountains are only outlined against the gray sky. Above, an undercut bluff fades behind the mist. This landscape painting by Sesshu is in Haboku, or broken ink style, and the strokes are made freely and rapidly, executed in a style in which ink seems to have been effortlessly applied. However easy it may look, it takes skill. With incredible economy of means, Sesshu has suggested land at the edge of water, large trees, and tall background mountains, and has even peopled his composition with 2 figures in the boat close to the shore, and a village of houses with the distinct flag-bearing pole of a sake house. During the 14th century, the development of great Zen monasteries in Kamakura and Kyoto had a major impact on the visual arts. Suibokuga, an austere monochrome style of ink painting, introduced from Song and Yuan dynasty China, largely replaced the polychrome scroll paintings of the previous period. By the end of the 14th century, monochrome landscape paintings had found patronage by the ruling Ashikaga family and was the preferred genre among Zen painters, gradually evolving from its Chinese roots to a more Japanese style. In the late Muromachi period, ink painting had migrated out of the Zen monasteries into the art world in general, as artists from the Kano school and the Ami school adopted the style and themes, but introduced a more plastic and decorative effect that would continue into modern times. The Ashikaga were great patrons of the art, especially those espoused by Zen masters. During the Muromachi period, 2 distinct cultural environments grew up around the retreats of 2 of the retired Ashikaga shoguns, the villa of Yoshimitsu, which became known as Kinkakuji, or the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, and the bills of his grandson Yoshimasa, or the Ginkakuji, or the Temple of Silver Pavilion. Both were constructed as elegant settings for retirement, where Yoshimitsu and Yoshimasa could devote themselves to leisurely pursuits. Not until after their deaths were the buildings converted into temples. The Kinkakuji is a 3-storied structure covered in gold foil. I saw it in person and can confirm it's very shiny. Set at the edge of a large artificial lake, the gardens also have 2 pagodas and a large 3-storied pavilion overlooking a lake. The original Kinkakuji was destroyed in 1950, but was rebuilt and restored soon after. Modeled on a Chinese prototype often seen in kara-e painting, the pavilion is designed to house several different types of activities. The first floor, which serves for informal relaxation and contemplation of the lake and garden, is provided with a Heian Shinden-style hinged lattice panels that can be raised so that the interior is opened up for viewing. The second floor, in the style favored by the warrior elite, is an enclosed L-shaped space with a deep veranda along the lake to serve as a kind of moon viewing platform. The top floor was designed as a temple room to be provided with the statues of Amida Buddha and 25 bodhisattvas, as well as a Buddha relic acquired from Ginkakuji in Kamakura. Yoshimasa's Ginkakuji is quite the opposite of Kinkakuji. Unlike what the name and association with the previous temple would suggest, it was never covered in silver leaf. Ginkakuji is a 2-storied, 2-roofed building. The first floor was used for meditation and had walls composed of sliding doors, which could be opened up to a view of the lake and extensive gardens. The second floor was designed as a chapel dedicated to Kennen, and it may have been intended to have the interior covered in silver. Unlike the gardens designed for aristocratic mansions in Nara and Heian, or the viewing gardens of Zen subtemples, the gardens of Kinkakuji and Ginkakuji were more like parks intended for leisurely walks, during which it was most important to be able to view the pavilion from different viewpoints. Yoshimitsu and Yoshimasa were both avid supporters of the arts. It was a way to give themselves legitimacy as national rulers and to eclipse the imperial court, whose role as the nation's cultural center was the last shred of function it maintained. A school of painters called the Kano school rose to prominence with Kano Masanobu. The Kano school, whose heyday was more in the second half of the 16th and the 17th century, continued to be an influence in Kanga, or Chinese-style painting. Kanga is essentially a more modern term for kara-e. The Kano were descended from a low-ranking samurai family from the area around Shizuoka Prefecture and had an affiliation not with the Zen but with the Nichiren or Hokkei set of Buddhism. Nichiren Buddhism began with yet another strong and charismatic 13th century leader, Nichiren. Based exclusively on the Lotus Sutra, it emphasizes the recitation of the Lotus Sutra's title, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, in much the same way as the Nembutsu mantra is chanted in Pure Land Buddhism. Nichiren's son, Motonobu, was an artist who helped establish the Kano style and to position the school as the chief painters to the shogunate. Motonobu was a remarkably versatile painter, capable of working in the brightly colored Yamato-esque style of narrative painting, in a meticulous Chinese genre of bird and flower paintings, and in a freer style of kanga, combining figural and landscape motifs. This later style was fully developed by the early 16th century and is well represented in 6 panels by Motonobu depicting Zen patriarchs, originally designed as wall and door paintings, but now refashioned into hanging scrolls. These paintings were executed around 1513 for the abbot's room in the Kyakuden, or the guest hall of the Daisenin. Although these are only a portion of the paintings that originally decorated this room, they represent a continuous sequence moving from right to left. With the exception of the second painting, each panel depicts 1 or 2 Zen patriarchs engaged in various activities such as sweeping, gazing at peach blossoms, and bidding a friend farewell, set in strongly delineated Chinese-style landscapes. This one shows Kyogen achieving enlightenment while sweeping with a bamboo broom. Kyogen was asked by his master about his life before birth and his present incarnation. Unable to reply, Kyogen set himself single-mindedly to find the answer. When Buddhist texts failed to help, he burned his library and sought answers through meditation. Finally, when he was tending his garden, a tile fell off the roof of his house, and at the sound, Kyogen achieved enlightenment. The painting shows him sweeping his yard. At his feet, the tile shattered into 3 pieces. Startled by the noise, he has taken a step backward and raised his right hand in amazement at the event and at his sudden enlightenment. In general, Motonobu established the center of the composition with a single motif, such as Kyogen's house. Then, interest or tension is created with secondary elements placed on a diagonal, such as this large boulder on the right and the bamboo grove. This also suggests recession into the picture while challenging the primacy of the central image. The image demonstrates the adoption of Chinese influences as it sets Japanese architecture against Chinese model landscapes. With the close of the Muromachi period, Japan's medieval epoch also comes to an end. Although the system of dictatorship, or bakufu, would continue for the better part of 3 centuries, Japan's society and culture enter into a new age which elsewhere in the world has been characterized as early modern. Japan becomes increasingly secular, and while Buddhism and Shinto will remain important social and political influences, culturally they will take a backseat as the breakdown of boundaries between the sacred and profane, begun by Zen monk painters, continues. It is the merchants and artisans, the lowest of the 4 classes, who begin to take their place, not only as creators of Japanese art, but also as its leading patrons. We'll be covering that in the next video on Japanese art history. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'm doing a whole series on Japanese art, everything from prehistoric to Heian period, modern Japan to contemporary art and pop culture. Be sure to subscribe to catch them all. Special thanks to our Patreon supporters. I really appreciate your contributions. If you like Little Art Talks and you want to help us keep making more great new videos, you can check out patreon.com/littlearttalks. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really helps this channel out, and I'll see you guys next time.